The day began like any other, with the sun casting its golden rays over a sprawling metropolis, a testament to human ambition and ingenuity. The city was just beginning to stir, the gentle hum of traffic a familiar morning symphony. But this was not to be an ordinary day. Suddenly, a violent tremor ripped through the city, the very foundations of civilization shaking as if in the grip of a furious god. The world vibrated with an intensity that blurred the lines between buildings and sky. From the bases of several skyscrapers, plumes of dust erupted, monuments of glass and steel groaning under the immense strain. A deep guttural roar echoed from the earth, a primal scream that spoke of ancient powers unleashed. From a street corner, the view was apocalyptic. An ultra-modern skyscraper, a beacon of progress, now seemed to ripple like water in a disturbed pond. Its glass panels, once reflecting the morning sun, shattered outwards, raining a deluge of sharp, deadly shards onto the panicked streets below. The cascading glass, captured in slow motion, was a beautiful and terrifying spectacle, a storm of man-made crystals descending upon the city. Amidst the chaos, a young woman ran, her face a mask of terror, her eyes wide with disbelief, reflecting the falling debris. A single tear carved a path through the dust on her cheek, a poignant symbol of the city's broken heart. All around her, people screamed and fled, their voices drowned out by the symphony of destruction, the twisting of metal and the cracking of concrete. A massive suspension bridge, a lifeline connecting two halves of the city, became the next victim. With a series of deafening cracks, like cannon fire, its colossal steel support cables snapped one by one. The immense structure, a dying metal leviathan, began to buckle and sag under its own impossible weight. On the bridge deck, chaos reigned. Cars slid and collided, piling up on the violently tilting roadway as people scrambled from their vehicles, clinging desperately to railings, their screams lost in the cacophony. From the churning river below, the view was horrifying. The central span of the bridge tore apart, plunging into the water and sending a titanic splash high into the air. In the heart of the financial district, a massive sinkhole ripped open, swallowing a historic fountain, ancient trees, and unsuspecting pedestrians in an instant. The earth, it seemed, had turned to wet paper. A family sprinted down a street, the asphalt cracking ahead of them like lightning, geysers of steam erupting from the fissures. Even the city's stone guardians were not safe. An extreme close-up revealed a cracking marble statue of a city founder, a single tear-like fracture running down its face before it toppled and shattered on the steps of City Hall. The initial destruction was staggering. The cityscape was a jagged wound of collapsed overpasses, fractured skyscrapers, and spreading dust clouds that choked the morning sun. Overlooking the city, nestled in the mountains, stood a massive concrete hydroelectric dam, a symbol of humanity's control over nature. A colossal crack spidered across its face, and water began to spray out with immense, unstoppable pressure. Inside the dam's control room, alarms blared and lights flashed red. The needles on structural integrity monitors were buried in the red zone, and the engineers could only look on with pale faces of pure, unadulterated horror. The dam didn't just break, it exploded outwards in a solid wall of water, a liquid battering ram that annihilated the valley below and rushed towards the already crippled city. Following the leading edge of the floodwater, the view was one of utter devastation. The wall of water, thick with trees and debris, obliterated everything in its path with contemptuous ease. On a rooftop, a man grabbed his child, holding them tight, his face a mask of disbelief and despair as the urban tsunami filled the horizon. The flood hit the city's edge with a chaotic surge, the dark, churning soup of mud and debris engulfing the first line of buildings, tossing cars about like toys. The world became a murky and violent underwater scene, with submerged cars and streetlights flashing by in the chaotic current. The tops of skyscrapers became islands in a raging, newly formed sea, the scale of the disaster truly biblical. A famous glass-domed botanical garden imploded under the immense water pressure, creating a swirling vortex of shattered glass and twisted steel. A child's bright yellow raincoat floated amidst the debris, a devastating symbol of the human cost. The city's infrastructure was no match for the flood. A major multi-level freeway interchange became a colossal, multi-tiered waterfall, completely submerging the intricate network of roads, A small group of survivors clung to a floating section of a collapsed building, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion as they navigated the treacherous currents. Water cascaded down the stairs of a subway entrance in a terrifying indoor waterfall, its roar echoing through the submerged tunnels. The city's iconic sports stadium, a massive bowl, filled rapidly with floodwater until its domed roof groaned and collapsed inward, creating a massive whirlpool. On a rooftop, a lone police officer desperately tried to help people to higher ground as the water continued to rise relentlessly, a battle he was clearly losing. As if the flood wasn't enough, a new terror was unleashed. The immense pressure of the water caused a massive underground gas main to rupture, sending a huge bubble of gas to the surface. The bubble burst and was ignited by a spark from a falling power line, creating a massive rolling fireball that spread across the water in all directions. The sudden, intense orange glow of the explosion illuminated the shocked faces of survivors, their terror renewed as a wave of heat washed over them. A chain reaction began, the fire spreading across the water, igniting fuel from submerged cars and ruptured tanks, creating a hellish landscape of fire on water. A skyscraper, its base weakened by the flood, tilted and collapsed into a neighboring building, igniting a new, massive fire that climbed its facade. People trapped on a mid-level apartment balcony were caught between the flood below and the raging fire spreading up from the floors beneath, with no hope of escape. The city became a Dantean inferno. A burning unmanned city bus, carried by the current, crashed into other buildings, spreading the flames like a giant mobile torch. The surface of the flood itself began to steam from the intense heat. A historic library, half submerged, saw its windows explode outwards from the heat, priceless books and manuscripts consumed by flames that blackened the sky. The sky was now a terrifying canvas of black smoke and orange fire, with the silhouettes of ruined skyscrapers against the blaze, and ash began to fall like black snow. A firefighter on a rooftop could only stare helplessly at the city-wide conflagration, his water hose useless against the scale of the disaster. A massive crane atop a skyscraper, superheated by the fire, slowly bent and twisted before crashing down into the fiery, watery streets below. The air distorted with the heat as the city burned. A man trapped in his car on an overpass with the flood on one side and a wall of fire on the other let out a silent scream, unheard in the roar. The city was simultaneously drowning and burning under a smoke-choked sky, a testament to civilization's utter collapse. The immense heat and water vapor from the disaster created a monstrous rotating supercell thunderstorm directly above the city. Survivors looked up at the churning greenish-black sky, a terrifying boiling cauldron rumbling with constant thunder. Hailstones the size of fists began to fall, smashing everything they touched, shattering car windshields and punching through roofs. Thick, ominous funnel clouds descended from the storm, writhing like malevolent tentacles. One became a massive waterspout, sucking up fire, debris, and water into a terrifying vortex. Survivors huddled in a concrete parking garage as a tornado ripped the steel doors off the entrance. An F5 tornado carved a path through a district of skyscrapers, peeling off their facades and twisting their steel skeletons. The city's iconic clock tower was ripped from its foundations and disintegrated into the swirling vortex. 3 massive tornadoes moved in parallel paths, grinding engines of pure destruction, leaving nothing but ruin in their wake. Then came the cold. The volcanic ash and storm clouds blotted out the sun, and a deep, unnatural twilight descended. The temperature dropped catastrophically, the very air feeling like it was freezing. A survivor's breath froze into a cloud of ice crystals, their wet clothes stiffening and crackling. The churning floodwaters slowed, thickened, and then froze solid in seconds, trapping everything in a grotesque, icy tableau. The roar of the flood was replaced by an unnerving, absolute silence. The flames on a burning skyscraper were extinguished by supercooled rain and sleet, which froze on contact, encasing the structure in a jagged tomb of ice. A survivor, trying to run for shelter, slipped on the black ice, a layer of freezing rain quickly coating and paralyzing their body. The entire flooded cityscape was rapidly encased in a thick sheet of ice, the fires dying, replaced by an eerie, frozen stillness. The tornadoes retreated into the sky, their energy dissipated by the cold. Survivors inside a bus watched in horror as the world outside crystallized, frost sealing them in darkness. A single perfectly formed tear of ice froze onto the cheek of a bronze statue of a child, a moment of eternal, metallic sadness. The frozen city became a silent cathedral of ice. From the now snow-capped mountains, a new glacier began its slow, unstoppable descent towards the frozen city, a final brutalist statement from nature. A skyscraper, its foundation compromised by fire and flood, shattered at its base as the water within it froze and expanded, collapsing in a cloud of ice dust. The glacier entered the city's outskirts, grinding skyscrapers and entire city blocks into dust and rubble. The city was gone, replaced by a jagged, frozen wasteland under a perpetually gray, sunless sky. Weeks later, the unnatural winter receded and a weak sun appeared. The great ice sheet began to melt, not into a flood, but into thousands of trickling streams and new rivers carving paths through the ruins. The sound of running water returned, and with it, the return of the wild. A lone wolf stood atop a pile of rusted cars, its howl echoing through the empty urban canyons. Nature began to reclaim its territory. Thick, green vines and moss grew over a collapsed building, a stark contrast to the gray concrete and rusted rebar. Waterfalls cascaded down the sides of broken skyscrapers, feeding a lush green marshland that had overgrown the streets. The roots of massive trees broke through the ceilings of subway tunnels, reaching down into the darkness. The detritus of a lost civilization lay half buried in silt. A child's tricycle, a single high-heeled shoe, a waterlogged stack of photographs, and a newspaper headline, "Future is bright," now faded and peeling, partially covered by a sprouting sapling. Humanity, however, endured. Small groups of survivors, gaunt and clad in rags, cautiously navigated the treacherous ruins, no longer citizens, but foragers. A small, functioning settlement was built upon the decks of a massive cargo ship that had been carried miles inland, a fortress in the sky. A heavily damaged building finally gave way, collapsing in a slow, majestic cloud of dust, a final aftershock of the cataclysm. Yet amidst the decay, a single resilient wildflower bloomed from a crack in the pavement, a defiant splash of color. The new world was fraught with peril. A survivor cautiously peered around a corner as a pack of feral, starving dogs stalked through the ruins, the new predators of this urban jungle. Another carefully tested the stability of a makeshift bridge, a fallen I-beam spanning a deep chasm where a street used to be, where a single misstep meant certain death. A massive toxic green algae bloom spread across the stagnant receding floodwaters, a deadly legacy of spilled industrial chemicals. The skeletal remains of a hospital's radiology department emitted invisible, deadly radiation. The breakdown of society was complete, as two survivors fought violently over the last bottle of antibiotics in a deserted pharmacy. The city itself had become a series of environmental traps, with unstable piles of debris and weakened floors posing constant threats. An ongoing chemical fire in a ruined industrial park poisoned the air and rain for miles. The sheer physical toll of this new life was immense, as evidenced by the raw, blistered hands of a survivor clearing rubble. With no law to protect them, survivors were forced to fight for their lives against rival groups. Yet, in the midst of this desolation, sparks of a new civilization began to ignite. A small, fortified community was established on the upper connected floors of several structurally sound skyscrapers, a tiny constellation of campfires in a vast sea of darkness. A child born after the cataclysm laughed as they chased a butterfly in a rooftop greenhouse. This ruined their only known world. A group of foragers discovered an untouched, sealed underground food storage bunker, their faces overwhelmed with relief and joy. Then, a miracle. From a hand-cranked radio, after an eternity of static, a faint, crackling voice emerged, reading a list of other survivor settlements. They were not alone. The impact of this realization was profound. The sunset over the ruined city was hauntingly, terrifyingly beautiful, the sky a brilliant, fiery purple and orange due to the lingering stratospheric dust. Survivors on a high vantage point looked out over their shattered world, not with despair, but with a resilient, quiet determination. They raised a makeshift flag, a symbol of their endurance and the birth of a new identity. An elderly survivor taught children how to purify water and identify edible plants, passing on essential, hard-won knowledge. They charted a new world on crudely drawn maps, the old city map now useless. A runner expertly navigated the ruins, delivering messages between settlements, a sign of humanity's adaptation. In a distant ruined skyscraper, an answering light flickered to life, a connection made across the desolate landscape. Leaders from two different survivor groups forged a fragile alliance with a tentative handshake. A child planted a seed in a rooftop garden, a simple, profound act of faith in the future. The final view, ascending high above the city, mirrored the first, but the landscape was transformed. It was no longer a grid of human ambition, but a wild, beautiful, and dangerous new wilderness, dotted with the tiny, fragile sparks of a reborn humanity. The apocalypse was an ending, but it was also a beginning.